I never thought a simple visit to my daughter's new apartment would leave me feeling unsettled. The moment I stepped through the building's entrance, something felt off. It wasn't the smell, or the faint echo of footsteps in the empty hallway. It was the silence. Too perfect, too deliberate. My daughter, Emma, bounced ahead, keys jingling, her grin brighter than any sunlight that filtered through the windows. "Mom, you're finally here. Come on, come see," she squealed, dragging me along. I followed, trying to match her energy, but I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was watching. As she unlocked the door to her new place, she turned with excitement that made my heart ache. "This is it. Can you believe it?" I smiled, forcing warmth into my voice. "It's beautiful, Em." She threw open the door, and the apartment revealed itself in all its freshly painted glory. White walls, sunlight bouncing off polished floors, the faint scent of new carpet. She flung her arms wide as if she were unveiling a treasure. "Here's your kitchen, Mom. And over there is the living room. Wait until you see the balcony. It's huge." I nodded, moving slowly, taking in the space, trying to focus on her happiness. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Something about the layout, the hallway outside, the way shadows pulled in corners, made me uneasy. As she jabbed at cupboards and cabinets, humming with glee, I noticed a figure on the balcony across the hall. Just for a split second, a shadow leaned forward, staring. My gut tightened. I blinked, convinced I'd imagined it. "Mom, you're staring like I just told you we're moving to Mars," she said, grinning, oblivious to the fleeting figure. I forced a laugh. "Just taking it all in, sweetheart. This place is a lot." Emma clapped her hands, bouncing from room to room, pointing out each feature with pride. "And this is my bedroom. You'll love it." I even picked out the curtains myself. Maybe it was about the people in it, or the ones who would come to be watching. I crouched to help her unpack a box, trying to calm the storm of unease in my chest. The boxes smelled faintly of cardboard and pine-scented polish. I noticed the pattern on her neighbor's balcony again, how it looked empty yet somehow alive, like a predator waiting. I shook my head, scolding myself silently for letting paranoia creep in. "You okay, Mom?" Emma asked, pausing mid-lift with a box of books. Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, brushing it off, but I kept glancing toward the balcony. Nothing. Just shadows stretching across concrete. I tried to breathe through it, focusing on the mundane, helping her place books on shelves, straightening throw pillows, laughing at her excitement. Still, I caught myself looking at every passing figure in the hallway, wondering who might linger just outside our line of sight. Every footstep, every muffled voice from a neighboring apartment seemed sharper than it should be. Emma noticed my distraction. "Mom, are you spying on the neighbors again?" "You always do that," I forced a chuckle. "Not spying, just making sure the view's nice." My voice sounded hollow even to me. She rolled her eyes, hugging a box to her chest. "You worry too much. Look, everything is perfect. Isn't it?" "Perfect," I muttered, but my eyes kept scanning. Something about the air in this building was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on why. We moved to the balcony, and the city spread below us, glittering in the late afternoon sun. Emma leaned on the railing, soaking it in. I watched her, heart swelling with love, but the shadow of the figure across the hall pricked at the edge of my thoughts. I wanted to warn her, to tell her to stay cautious, but what if it was nothing? I didn't want to ruin her excitement. We went back inside, arranging her new space. Each time I glanced at the hallway or the balcony opposite, I saw movement, or thought I did. A twitch of a curtain, a fleeting shape. My chest tightened, stomach twisting with that unnameable dread. "This is going to be my favorite place ever," Emma said, collapsing onto the couch with a book. She looked so safe, so blissfully unaware. And I realized then that maybe the unease wasn't about the building. I kept my eyes open. I promised myself I wouldn't dismiss it. And yet, I told her everything looked fine, even as the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Then, as we arranged a few more boxes, I caught the shadow again, lingering just long enough for me to know it was watching, deliberate this time. My throat went dry, and a chill ran through me. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile at Emma. "Let's grab some dinner. You must be starving after all this unpacking." She nodded, still glowing with excitement. But inside me, my heart was hammering with the knowledge that something about this apartment wasn't right, and I didn't yet know just how wrong it really was. And then, just as I was about to leave the apartment with Emma, the landlord pulled me aside, and said words that would change everything. I didn't expect a casual visit to my daughter's new apartment to feel like stepping into a trap. I had just set down the last box, brushing a thin layer of dust off my hands, when the landlord appeared at the edge of the living room. His face, usually warm with the faint smile of professionalism, was tight, almost strained. He gestured subtly for me to follow him to the side corridor. My stomach clenched. Something about the way he leaned in, the urgency in his eyes, it wasn't ordinary concern. "You need to leave now," he whispered, low enough that my daughter couldn't hear, though I knew she was watching me carefully. For a moment I froze, convinced I must have done something embarrassing, a misunderstanding. My mind raced. Unpaid fees? A building rule? Or had I accidentally intruded somewhere I shouldn't? But his stare held no judgment, only warning. It felt heavy, almost physical, pressing against my chest, making each breath shallow. "Excuse me?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but a tremor betrayed my nerves. "Please," he said, voice barely audible. "I know it sounds strange, but you shouldn't be here tonight. Not for long." I blinked, trying to understand. Is this about the lease? Or some issue with the apartment?" "No," he replied sharply, his hand twitching at his side, almost like he wanted to gesture but restrained himself. "It's not safe. I can't explain everything here. Just go. Now." I felt my pulse spike, a cold bead of sweat sliding down my spine. "Safe? What do you mean safe?" He shook his head, a tight, controlled movement. "I can't say more. Not here. But trust me. Leave." The corridor felt narrower than it should, the fluorescent light flickering overhead, shadows stretching long and thin across the walls. The hum of the building's air conditioning was suddenly deafening, making the urgency in his voice echo in my head. Behind him, my daughter's eyes, wide, curious, tracked every movement. I forced a smile, trying to mask the sudden panic coiling inside me. Even the boxes I had just unpacked seemed suffocating, too rigid, too new, as if the apartment itself was conspiring with his warning. I wanted to protest, to demand an explanation, but something primal in me recognized that this wasn't a game, or a misunderstanding. The fear in his expression was genuine. He wasn't manipulating me for rent money or building politics. He was scared. And if he was scared, then I had every reason to be. My daughter noticed the tension, her brow furrowing. "Mom? What's wrong?" she asked, voice hesitant, like stepping on the edge of a fragile ice sheet. I forced a laugh, patting her shoulder, but my heart thumped erratically. How could I explain without sounding paranoid? How could I protect her when even the landlord's cryptic words hinted at danger I couldn't yet see? "Nothing," I said finally, voice firmer than I felt. "Just a lot to take in." "Please," he repeated, glancing nervously toward the lobby. "Go. Tonight. Don't ask questions." I started, then swallowed hard. Something in his urgency, in the twitch at his jaw, convinced me. This wasn't about bureaucracy or rules. There was something else, something unseen. The apartment felt colder suddenly, the excitement of new beginnings slipping like sand through my fingers. I glanced again at the balcony across the hall, the one I had noticed before, empty now, yet somehow heavier, as though it had been watching, waiting. I could feel the tension in my daughter, the unasked questions hanging between us like smoke. I wanted to protect her, shield her from this invisible threat, but I had no idea what I was shielding her from. The normal warmth, the pride, the joy, it all seemed like a fragile mask, about to tear. My instincts screamed that the danger wasn't abstract. It was here. It was now. And then I realized, the landlord wasn't just warning me about the building. He was warning me about them, whoever or whatever they were. I swallowed, heart pounding, and whispered under my breath, "I wish I could just take her home, but I can't. Not yet. Not until I know what we're really up against." I thought I could ignore it. I really did. But the second the landlord's words echoed in my mind, a chill ran down my spine that no amount of rationalizing could shake. We were standing in the middle of her new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the smell of fresh paint and cardboard mixing in a strange, almost suffocating way. My daughter was humming quietly, bouncing between shelves as she tried to find the perfect spot for her dishes. Her laughter was light, almost carefree, but every time I looked at her, I felt a tightening in my chest. "Mom, you're overthinking this," she said, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "The landlord's probably just eccentric. You know, paranoid about something small. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, forced a smile, and said, "Yeah, you're probably right." But my mind refused to settle. His eyes had carried a weight, an urgency, I couldn't ignore. Something about the way he leaned in, voice low and taut, told me this wasn't ordinary caution. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just dramatic, a man with too much concern for everyone else's safety. But even as I said that, the pit in my stomach reminded me that some instincts are sharper than reason. I turned to the window, attempting casual curiosity as my eyes swept across the neighboring apartments. The residents were smiling, talking, exchanging pleasantries, or so it seemed. Mr. Patel from 2 floors down waved, overly deliberate, with a practiced cheerfulness that almost made me flinch. Across the hall, a couple leaned over the railing, laughing at something, perfectly synchronized in body language, almost rehearsed. Even the mailman hesitated longer than necessary as he handed over letters, glancing back with a forced smile. Every gesture felt staged, as if they knew I was watching, as if the apartment itself were hiding a secret performance I wasn't meant to see. I felt my pulse quicken, but I couldn't let my daughter notice. She didn't need to see the worry etched into my face, the way my hands trembled as I set down a box. I forced myself to breathe slowly, adopting the casual tone of someone admiring a new home. "This room catches the sunlight nicely in the morning," I said, scanning the space as if it were merely aesthetic observations, while secretly memorizing every detail of the floor plan and balcony positions. She smiled, unaware of my inner turmoil. "I love it here. Isn't it perfect? Just think of all the little memories we'll make." Her words should have comforted me. They didn't. I could feel the shadows of my unease crawling into every corner of the room. Even as I helped her arrange books and hang a picture, my eyes kept flicking to the balcony across the hall. A figure lingered there for a moment, half hidden in shadow, and I froze. My mind raced. Was it a neighbor? Someone spying? I forced myself to dismiss it. Probably just a passerby or someone checking the weather, but a twinge of dread lingered. I started taking note quietly, pretending to be absorbed in chores. I memorized patterns: who came and went, who paused a second too long, who smiled too perfectly. There was an odd rhythm to their interactions, too calculated, too precise. I couldn't place it yet, but every tiny action whispered that something was wrong, that normalcy here was just a mask. My daughter set down a cup and laughed softly. "Mom, you're staring again. Relax." I gave her a reassuring nod, hiding the way my hands clenched briefly at my sides. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Thinking about what? About that warning. About the unnerving precision of the neighbors. About the shadow I couldn't stop seeing in my mind's eye. The apartment felt different now, the walls closer, the air heavier. I tried to focus on the boxes, on labeling shelves, on anything that would anchor me to mundane tasks. But every brush of wind against the window, every murmur from the hallway, reminded me that danger might be lurking just beyond what my eyes could confirm. By the time we finished arranging the last box, I had mapped the building in my mind, the comings and goings, the patterns, the odd behaviors. Pretending casual observation, I was cataloging anomalies, preparing myself for what I didn't yet fully understand. Rational thought wrestled with instinct, and instinct was winning. I smiled at my daughter, carefully measured, as she chatted excitedly about her plans. But beneath that surface, my mind was alert, scanning, anticipating. I couldn't yet name the fear, but I knew it was real. The apartment, bright and seemingly welcoming, was hiding something. Something I had to uncover before it was too late. And then, as I glanced at the balcony across the hall, I saw movement, a shadow shifting in a way that made my blood run cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, even when no one was looking directly. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in the corner of my vision, but enough to make my stomach knot with unease. The next day, the apartment felt different. Morning sunlight spilled lazily across the floor, but the warmth did nothing to calm the creeping tension inside me. My daughter flitted from room to room, arranging her little things with the kind of carefree joy I envied. Meanwhile, I noticed the neighbors, or rather, I noticed them noticing me. From the kitchen window, I caught Mr. Patel across the hall glancing my way, then abruptly turning as if caught in the act. Across the landing, a young woman whispered hurriedly to another neighbor, her head jerking slightly in my direction before they both stifled laughter and smiled too sweetly when I glanced up. I forced myself to blink, to relax, to convince myself it was normal human curiosity. But my gut twisted uncomfortably, insisting that these weren't casual glances or polite smiles. They were something else. Later that afternoon, as I carried a basket of laundry down the hallway, I noticed a door open a crack, just enough for a shadow to slip behind it. A low murmur escaped, followed by a hurried scurry that sounded almost too practiced, too rehearsed. My pulse jumped, but when I turned my head, nothing. Only the empty hallway stretching back toward the elevator, silent except for my own cautious steps. "Mom, you're staring again," my daughter said lightly, peeking over my shoulder as I inspected the landing. "They're just neighbors. Relax." I nodded, forcing a smile, but the tension didn't ease. I kept my attention on the subtle cues, the soft shuffle behind closed doors, the faint slamming of cabinet drawers, the way voices cut off when I approached. Each movement seemed too deliberate, like actors playing a part they were not meant to perform for me. At night, the unease escalated. The apartment was quiet, or at least it should have been. But there were soft creaks, floorboards settling, or footsteps pacing someone's apartment. A door thumped closed, the sound echoing unnaturally long in the empty hall. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more, feeling my heartbeat accelerate as the dark corners of my mind started filling in the blanks. I started keeping a mental log. Patterns emerged in small but disturbing ways: who came in and out, when, how long they lingered in hallways, and who disappeared behind doors the moment I glanced their way. The neighbors' routines were unnervingly consistent, almost mechanical. I realized I was tracking more than just curiosities. I was collecting evidence, like some paranoid detective in my own apartment building. Meanwhile, my daughter laughed at some joke across the hall. Her voice should have been comforting, but instead it grated on my nerves. I wanted her to trust people, to feel safe here, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The normal apartment noises now felt like cues in a rehearsed performance, a sinister ballet of observation I was too early in noticing. Even innocuous encounters became layered with suspicion. A neighbor holding the elevator smiled at me, too quick, teeth flashing, eyes darting briefly to my daughter. A tiny tick in his expression, a twitch of the jaw, a lingering glance, made me step back in subtle alarm. Polite hellos, when I thought about it, carried a strange weight, a subtext I couldn't yet decipher. By late evening, I felt a creeping sensation of being watched from multiple angles at once. Shadows behind curtains, faint movements in windows across the hall, whispers just beyond comprehension. I couldn't tell if it was real or paranoia, but I had learned not to ignore instincts like these. Every sound, every shift in light, every smile became part of a growing mosaic of unease. I forced myself to act normal for my daughter's sake, helping her organize her books, adjusting picture frames, laughing lightly at her chatter. But in my mind, I was reconstructing the building as a surveillance map. Exits, entries, hallways, eyes, ears. Something was off, something dangerous, and I was starting to realize that the charming facades we encountered daily hid a truth I wasn't prepared for. And as I pressed my ear to the door that night, listening to the faint, deliberate movements beyond it, I understood that the neighbors were no ordinary people, and that our safety was already at risk. I didn't mean to hear anything, I swear, but the words drifted through the crack in the door like ice water on my spine. I had been rearranging the living room, stacking books and fluffing cushions, trying to make the apartment feel like home for my daughter. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint clatter of her unpacking, it all seemed ordinary. Until a voice, low and clipped, reached my ears from the hallway. "You know what happened last week? Can't let anyone find out." I froze, every muscle tightening. My hand hovered over a stack of magazines, pretending to adjust them, but my ears strained. Another voice, softer but edged with urgency, answered. "Yeah, we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Don't worry, he doesn't know yet." My blood ran cold. My heart pounded, thumping against my ribs like a warning drum. I glanced at my daughter, blissfully unaware, and a flicker of panic shot through me. Who were they talking about? And more importantly, what did they mean by it? I stepped back slightly, pretending to stretch, hoping they hadn't noticed me lurking. The conversation continued cryptic and precise, each word like a puzzle piece I didn't want to fit together, but couldn't help myself. "Everything's ready. Just make sure she's distracted," one whispered, almost a hiss, before the sound of their footsteps faded down the hall. I forced a laugh at my daughter's joke, masking my sudden tension, but my mind was racing. The landlord's warning echoed, "You need to leave now." Could this be what he meant? My gut screamed yes, but my voice had to stay calm. I started replaying every odd interaction with the neighbors, each forced smile, every furtive glance, every too friendly greeting. Patterns I had tried to ignore suddenly sharpened into a coherent, terrifying shape. The building wasn't just quiet, it was watching. And they weren't just watching me. I walked to the window, peeking out without seeming to, noting who came and went. Each movement felt rehearsed, calculated. Each smile too tight, too quick. The shadows in the hallway seemed deeper now, the light harsher, like the walls themselves were closing in. My daughter bounced over, holding a framed photo. "Look, Mom! Doesn't it make the room look bigger?" she said, oblivious to my rising anxiety. I smiled back, but it felt strained, brittle. Even in my attempt to stay calm, my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. What if they were planning something against her? Against me? Did the landlord know the truth, or just the tip of it? I needed answers. Slowly, I started forming a plan. Discreet, careful, but precise. I couldn't risk alarming her, not yet. The apartment's walls felt narrower now. Every creak, every echo, was amplified. The ordinary hum of life had transformed into a chorus of warning signs. My senses sharpened. Every detail mattered. The way the light hit the hallway, the soft shuffle of footsteps, the fleeting shadows across closed doors. I realized then that I couldn't trust appearances. The smiles were masks, the pleasantries were shields, and the secret they guarded, whatever it was dangerous. As I stood there, listening to the last fading echo of that cryptic conversation, I understood the apartment's calm was a lie, and the first clue I had uncovered was just the tip of a chilling truth that could change everything. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice firmer than I felt, gripping my daughter's hand lightly so she wouldn't notice the tremor in mine. "Now. No more hints." The landlord froze mid-step, his keys dangling loosely in one hand. His usual calm demeanor was fractured. There was a tension in his jaw I hadn't seen before. He glanced around, eyes flicking to the hallway, then back at me. I've noticed things," he muttered, voice low, almost as if admitting it aloud might summon some danger. "Things?" I pressed, heart hammering. "What things? You can't just leave it at that." He swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "Tenants disappearing. Unexplained incidents. Small at first, nothing that drew attention, but patterns." His gaze was fleeting, darting toward the floor, then up again, meeting mine with a hint of guilt. "Certain people, they have ways of keeping secrets. They watch, they wait. And your apartment, it's vulnerable." I felt my stomach drop. Every nerve screamed, every instinct flaring with warning. I looked down at my daughter, who was fidgeting with a cushion, innocently humming to herself, unaware that the ground beneath her life might be unstable. I forced myself to keep my voice even. "What do you mean by vulnerable?" He shifted, glancing at the walls as if they could hear us. "I can't say everything. But trust me, there are neighbors who, they don't want outsiders poking around. They have their methods, and they've noticed you're new." A cold sweat ran down my spine. I had tried to rationalize the warning, to dismiss it as overcaution, but now every odd glance, every whisper I had overheard, every smile that had felt too practiced, snapped into focus. I couldn't rely on anyone else in this building. My daughter's safety depended on me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I demanded, though I knew the answer. Fear made people cautious, and trust was hard to come by. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," he said finally, eyes hardening slightly. "But I didn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily. And some things are better left unsaid until you see them yourself." I swallowed hard, trying to digest the implications. Disappearing tenants, sinister neighbors, a building that masked danger behind polite facades, it all clicked into a terrifying mosaic. My pulse quickened as the sense of dread settled deep into my chest. I realized that from this moment on, I could trust no one. No neighbor, no passerby, no casual hello, only careful observation and cautious planning. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to work through the panic. I had to protect her. I had to understand their patterns, their movements, their secrets, without revealing that I knew. Every friendly smile could be a mask. Every casual comment, a trap. The mundane rhythms of apartment life suddenly became a stage, and I was determined to learn the script before it was too late. The landlord's words lingered like smoke in the air, dense and choking. I sensed his unease, the tension that hadn't been there before, and I realized he might be doing the best he could under constraints I couldn't even imagine. And yet, that only made it clearer. The responsibility, the burden, fell squarely on my shoulders now. Leaving the apartment that day, I felt the weight of every glance, every whispered conversation, every creak of the hallway press against me. The warning had evolved into a command. I could no longer dismiss it. The moment of realization struck me. I must act cautiously, deliberately, and alone, if I was to keep my daughter safe. I thought I was imagining things until I saw them move. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window, trying not to breathe too loudly. Darkness hung thick over the courtyard, broken only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, the way the wind made the tree branches sway. But then, definitely, figures slipped along the hallways, deliberate and silent. They paused by the neighboring doors, checking locks, testing handles, glancing around as if measuring the terrain. My heart hammered so loudly I worried it might wake my daughter. I swallowed hard and felt a cold knot settle in my stomach. Every instinct screamed danger, yet I had to remain calm. One panicked move, and everything could unravel. My daughter, safe in her room, blissfully unaware, trusted the walls to protect her. I could barely trust the walls myself. I crouched lower, straining to see better. There were at least 3 of them, hooded, methodical, almost rehearsed. One leaned close to a door, fiddling with the lock, and I saw the faint glint of metal. I shivered, imagining the worst, my mind racing through every horror scenario. I wanted to rush down the stairs, shout, intervene, but I froze. One misstep could ruin everything. I had to think. I traced their movements carefully, noting the way they communicated with subtle gestures, a hand here, a nod there. They moved like predators, organized, cold. My throat went dry as a sick realization hit me. These weren't random intruders. They knew the building. They knew my daughter's apartment. And they weren't just testing doors. They were planning something. I glanced at my sleeping child. Her tiny chest rose and fell steadily, innocence undisturbed. I wanted to scoop her up, run to a hotel, somewhere far from this madness. But I also knew I needed to understand the threat before acting. If I panicked too soon, I might tip them off. I had to gather as much information as I could. I watched them split up, shadows slipping along different hallways, checking cameras, peering through peepholes. One stopped abruptly, as if sensing someone watching. My heart lurched. I ducked lower behind the curtain. My pulse thundered in my ears. If they'd caught me, what would they do? My fingers trembled as I jotted mental notes. One tall figure with a limp, the other 2 moving fluidly like they had rehearsed every step. I memorized every detail, hand gestures, pauses, and patterns. Then came a sound, a soft click, almost drowned by the wind. My stomach dropped. The figures paused, glancing around, whispering briefly. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency was palpable. Something was happening tonight, and it wasn't trivial. It had escalated beyond vague warnings and strange glances. My landlord's grave tone replayed in my mind, disappearances, incidents, patterns. I realized, with a chill, that he had been trying to warn me. These were not idle tales. I debated my next move, weighing panic against strategy. I couldn't confront them directly. I had no backup. But I could alert someone, call the police, or, worse, tip them off that I'd seen them. My thoughts spiraled. Each decision seemed perilous. And all the while, my daughter's soft breathing reminded me why I couldn't afford mistakes. I grabbed my phone, fingers hovering over the screen. Video? Photos? I could try to capture proof without being seen, but every step risked exposure. I leaned closer to the window again, holding my breath as one shadow approached my daughter's door. My chest tightened. I couldn't let them get in. I had to prepare, shield, protect. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Their movements were patient, practiced, terrifyingly calm. They didn't rush. They didn't stumble. They were ghosts with intent. I realized this was bigger than a simple warning. The danger was immediate, tangible. My mind raced with protective measures, emergency exits, alternative plans. I pictured barricading the door, staying silent, keeping her safe. I rehearsed escape routes in my head while watching them, noting weaknesses, exits, anything that could give me a tactical advantage. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they melted back into the darkness, shadows swallowed by the night. My body didn't relax. I stayed pressed against the window, scanning the empty hallways, listening to the faint creaks and sighs of the building settling. It was quiet now, eerily so. But I knew better. The threat hadn't vanished. They had simply vanished from sight, leaving me to stew in the tension of their presence. I exhaled shakily, knowing sleep was impossible. My daughter, blissfully unaware, still trusted this place. I didn't, and for the first time, I understood the full weight of the landlord's warning. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't paranoia. It was life-saving advice. The danger was here, it was real, and it was my responsibility to shield her from it. And as I watched the empty hallway, my mind screamed that this was only the beginning. I had to be ready, or everything would be lost. I never thought curiosity could feel so deadly. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and old paint as I crept toward the maintenance area, my footsteps deliberately light. The faint hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound, masking the rapid thudding of my heart. Every instinct screamed caution. I'd been here before, of course, but tonight I wasn't just a visitor. I was a detective in my daughter's life, piecing together fragments that didn't add up. I pushed open the slightly ajar maintenance door and froze. Inside, the fluorescent light flickered weakly, throwing long shadows over stacks of boxes and forgotten furniture. My pulse spiked when I noticed something out of place: neatly labeled boxes, each bearing a name, names I recognized from the building ledger, tenants who had vanished, disappeared without warning. My hands trembled as I stepped closer, my mind racing to process the implications. What the hell? I muttered under my breath, voice barely audible. I rifled through one box, carefully avoiding any noise. Inside, I found personal items, wallets, jewelry, small keepsakes, things that should have remained with their owners, yet here they were, stashed away like evidence. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just theft or negligence. This was methodical, premeditated. Whoever was behind this had a plan, and it involved more than simple intimidation. I caught movement in the corner of my eye and froze. A shadow passed outside the small maintenance window, a slow, deliberate motion. My breath caught, but I forced myself to remain calm, pressing against the wall, blending with the darkness. My mind raced through possibilities. Could they know I was here? Had they been watching my daughter as closely as I'd suspected? Fear clawed at my chest, but so did determination. I couldn't leave without understanding the full extent of this danger. I opened another box, hard hammering, and found letters, photographs, personal mementos, all left behind by tenants who had vanished. Some had dates scribbled in the corner, notes hinting at disputes, arguments, warnings, fragments of lives interrupted. I felt a wave of nausea. These weren't random disappearances. This was a pattern, a disturbing one, meticulously maintained by someone with influence in the building. Anger began to mix with fear. How could anyone be so cruel? And yet here I was, piecing together their trail of predation. My mind darted to my daughter's apartment, imagining her alone, oblivious, vulnerable. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't just property at risk anymore. Her safety, her very life, hung in the balance. I crouched down to examine the door mechanisms in the maintenance area. Every door I inspected had subtle modifications, latches that could be manipulated from the outside, hinges that creaked ominously if tested incorrectly, locks that seemed ordinary but were designed for control. My pulse quickened as I mapped the building in my head, memorizing every exit, every vulnerability. Whoever these neighbors were, they were organized, precise, and dangerous. A faint creak echoed from the hallway outside the maintenance room. I froze, muscles tense, ready to dart behind a stack of crates. But after a few moments, silence returned. My mind played tricks on me, imagining figures moving in the dark, watching, waiting. I reminded myself to stay focused. Panic could be deadly. I crouched lower, rifling through one final box. There, at the bottom, lay a small stack of photos, images of my daughter's apartment taken from outside the window, night after night, capturing shadows, movements, and moments I hadn't noticed. My heart lurched violently. They had been watching her. They had known exactly when she was alone, exactly when the apartment was vulnerable. My hands shook as I held the photos, a mix of fear and rage coursing through me. These people weren't just creepy neighbors, they were predators, calculating, methodical, and ruthless. I realized, with a chilling clarity, that my earlier suspicions had barely scratched the surface. If they discovered my daughter alone tonight, I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. The thought was unbearable. I glanced at the maintenance window again. Shadows moved outside, slow, deliberate. My pulse accelerated, and I pressed myself against the wall, invisible, silent, absorbing every detail. Their schedule, their habits, the way they circled, the way they paused, all became pieces of a terrifying puzzle. My mind catalogued every risk, every moment of exposure. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the shadows receded, leaving the hallway empty once more. I exhaled shakily, tension coiling in my shoulders. I tucked the photos into my jacket, determined to take them with me. There was no time to waste. The evidence, the knowledge, had to be acted upon, carefully, deliberately. I couldn't confront them blindly. I had to prepare, strategize, protect. And as I slipped out of the maintenance area, heart still pounding, I realized the nightmare wasn't coming, it was already here. And now, I held the proof that could save my daughter, if I survived long enough to use it. I couldn't believe how close we had come to losing everything. The apartment felt smaller somehow, shadows creeping along the walls as I moved quietly, checking each corner, imagining every possible scenario. My daughter was in the next room, asleep, oblivious to the storm that was quietly gathering around her life. My hands shook, not with fear exactly, but with the surge of adrenaline that comes when you realize the full weight of responsibility. Every instinct screamed that I had to act, but one wrong move could push the danger from shadow to reality. I spread the landlord's floor plans across the kitchen table, tracing the path I had memorized over sleepless nights. The maintenance area, the back stairs, the poorly lit hallways, they all became a map in my mind, a guide to the predators who lurked in plain sight. "We need cameras here, here, and here," I murmured to myself, tapping the sheet with a trembling finger. The landlord, a wiry man with anxious eyes, nodded silently. He understood the stakes. He'd seen enough unexplained incidents himself to know this wasn't paranoia. "Are you sure this is safe?" he asked, voice low, almost a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might summon the very danger we were planning against. I paused, looking at him. "No. But it's necessary. If we wait any longer, it might be too late." My voice was steadier than I felt, but inside, every nerve was taut, every muscle primed for sudden action. We moved with purpose, installing small cameras in the hallways, tucking them behind vents, under corners of door frames, and in inconspicuous places where they wouldn't be noticed. Each movement was deliberate, rehearsed in my mind 100 times over. The landlord worked quietly, occasionally glancing at me, sharing a look that said we were both aware of the line we were walking. One misstep and it would all come crashing down. As we worked, my thoughts kept returning to the neighbors. I could almost see them in my mind, the subtle nods, the forced smiles, the way they timed their movements with precision. The same shadows I had spied outside my daughter's window, they weren't random. They were organized, patient, and methodical. Rage boiled under the surface, but I forced it down, because anger without a plan could be deadly. I paused to check the last camera placement, crouching low, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the vent. My heart pounded as I imagined someone stepping into view, eyes sharp, ready to strike. I swallowed, forcing my mind back to the plan. Distractions, timing, precision. Every detail mattered. One wrong second could reveal our hand, and we couldn't afford that. The landlord hesitated. "And what if they notice us tonight?" I shook my head, jaw tight. "Then we adapt. But for now we watch, we record, we learn. We don't react until we know exactly how they operate." My words sounded calm, but inside, a storm raged. I thought of my daughter sleeping peacefully, trusting this place as her home. That trust, it was fragile, and I was the only one standing between her and the predators who had been planning for her absence, her vulnerability. We finished the installations just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, spilling amber light into the apartment. I traced the paths in my mind once more, imagining every angle, every possible interruption, every escape route if things went wrong. I could feel the adrenaline in my veins, sharp and insistent, demanding action, demanding control. Sitting back, I let myself breathe for a moment, allowing the reality to sink in. Cameras in place, distractions ready, and a plan meticulously mapped out. Yet the tension was far from gone. I felt like both hunter and guardian, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. Every step I took, every thought I entertained, had consequences far beyond myself. I looked over at the landlord. "Are you ready to stay alert tonight?" I asked, voice low. He nodded again, lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll do whatever it takes." A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the full scope of what we were about to do. We weren't just confronting a nuisance or petty neighbors. We were facing orchestrated, deliberate danger, and I was putting myself in the center of it, fully aware that a single mistake could escalate everything into a nightmare. I thought of my daughter again, her soft breathing in the next room, the curve of her shoulder in the moonlight, trusting that I had her safe. That trust was sacred, and I would not betray it. Rage mingled with fear sharpened by strategy, and determination hardened like steel. Every step had to be precise, every action had to be calculated, and tonight, I whispered to myself, almost a vow, we find out exactly how far they'll go, and we make sure they regret ever crossing us. I felt the weight of the night pressing in, the shadows outside creeping closer, the unknown eyes watching. And yet, despite the fear, there was a surge of clarity, a sense of purpose I had never felt so intensely. The plan was set, the pieces were in place. Now, it was only a matter of execution, and I knew, with cold certainty, that nothing would be the same after tonight. I thought I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for the sound of footsteps outside her door. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the cameras I'd installed, tiny red lights blinking like quiet sentinels in the shadows. I crouched behind the living room sofa, my eyes fixed on the monitors, every fiber of my being alert. My daughter's breathing in the next room was steady, peaceful, but I couldn't let myself relax. Not yet. Not until this nightmare had been contained. The landlord whispered from the doorway, barely moving his lips. "They're coming." I nodded, heart hammering. I could see them now, shadows slipping along the hall, pausing to check doors and peering into the stairwell. My stomach knotted as I realized how deliberate their movements were, calculated, practiced. They weren't just casual intruders, they were organized, patient, predatory. My fingers gripped the edge of the sofa as if it were a lifeline. I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to focus. The plan was clear: observe, document, distract if necessary, but never let them realize we were aware of them. Every instinct screamed to rush out, to protect my daughter myself, but I knew that a premature move could turn this from a dangerous situation into a deadly one. "They're circling her door," the landlord murmured, voice tight. "What do we do if they try to break in?" I exhaled slowly, measuring my words. "Wait for the right moment. The cameras will capture everything. And when they step into the hallway trap I set." My voice trailed, heavy with tension. The thought of what would come next sent a chill down my spine. Outside the window, I saw one of the figures pause, hand on the knob of my daughter's apartment. My chest constricted. Every second stretched impossibly long. My mind raced, calculating distractions, escape routes, contingencies. This wasn't just about protecting property anymore. It was about her life. One figure stepped back and exchanged a brief gesture with the others. My stomach sank as I realized they had already coordinated. Fear mingled with a fierce, almost burning determination. I would not allow them to reach her. Not if I could stop it. A subtle creak echoed from the hallway. My body tensed. One of them was testing the door handle. My hands shook, but I forced calm, keeping my voice low. "No," I whispered to the landlord, barely audible. He nodded and moved silently to trigger the first distraction, a subtle noise in the stairwell, drawing the nearest figure away. It worked. One of them shifted, stepping cautiously toward the sound, and my pulse surged. I had only a few seconds. I moved swiftly, keeping low, hard thudding. The adrenaline was electric, pushing fear into a razor-sharp focus. Every step had to be precise. One mistake could put my daughter in direct danger. Through the camera feed, I saw the others reacting, confused by the sudden movement, their plans momentarily disrupted. I seized the opportunity, slipping out from my hiding spot and positioning myself where I could intervene without being seen, controlling the space between them and my daughter's door. "Stop!" I yelled, loud but controlled, ensuring they heard the authority in my voice. One froze, eyebrows furrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Another tried to advance. I stepped forward, hand raised, making sure my presence was undeniable. The landlord emerged behind me, quietly monitoring the other angle. "Who sent you?" I demanded, voice trembling with anger and fear. "Why are you here?" The figure hesitated, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, then backed off slightly. It was clear, they hadn't expected resistance. I could see their micro-expressions, tension in their jaw, eyes darting, the subtle twitch of panic setting in. Using that hesitation, I guided them away from the door, her door, ensuring she remained completely unaware. Each movement was deliberate, a delicate balance of intimidation and control. I was both shield and observer, walking the tightrope between courage and catastrophe. Minutes felt like hours. The tension coiled in my chest, sharp and relentless. But finally, they retreated, muttering threats I couldn't make out, disappearing into the shadows outside. The hallway was still. My body sagged against the wall, muscles trembling from adrenaline and relief. I checked the monitors one last time, every figure gone, every angle clear. My daughter was safe, untouched, sleeping unaware of the danger that had been inches from her. I exhaled deeply, trying to release the grip of fear that had held me captive all night. Sitting back, I realized something crucial. This was only the beginning. I had protected her tonight, yes, but the threat wasn't gone. And I had learned something about myself in the process. I could face terror, make split-second decisions, and hold my ground when everything else felt like it might crumble. And yet, as I finally allowed myself a moment of quiet, a cold thought crept in. They had known, somehow, that we were watching. That knowledge meant one thing: it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I finally let myself breathe, but only for a moment. The flashing lights of police cruisers painted the apartment walls in red and blue as officers moved with precise efficiency. My daughter clung to my side, small hands gripping mine, eyes wide with confusion. She didn't know, and I wasn't going to tell her yet. Not until I could be certain the danger had truly passed. "Everything's under control now," the officer said, a calm voice that barely cut through the pounding of my heart. "They'll be held accountable." I nodded, swallowing hard, trying to absorb the reality of the moment. Months of unease, suspicion, and sleepless nights had led to this. My eyes followed the officers as they escorted the culprits, their faces blank but defeated. The predators who had shadowed our lives, hidden in plain sight, now powerless under the weight of justice. The landlord approached, quiet but firm. "You did everything right," he said, his gaze steady. "The cameras, the timing, it worked. You saved her." I wanted to thank him properly, to express the relief and gratitude coiled in my chest, but words felt thin, inadequate. Instead, I simply nodded again, letting the weight of the acknowledgement settle. His eyes held an understanding I hadn't expected. He'd seen the tension, the planning, the fear, and respected the control I'd maintained under impossible circumstances. Inside, the apartment felt surreal. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the night was fading, leaving a raw, heavy exhaustion. My mind replayed every warning I had ignored, every subtle sign that should have alerted me sooner. The neighbors' strange habits, the small discrepancies in schedules, the almost imperceptible glances and whispers, I had dismissed them as quirks, nothing more. Now, the truth was undeniable. Danger had been inches away from my daughter's door, and I had been both blind and lucky. "She's okay, right?" my daughter whispered, voice trembling. I bent down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes," I said firmly, forcing a calm I didn't entirely feel. "You're safe, I promise." Her eyes searched mine, trust unbroken despite the tension. I wanted to cry at the purity of that trust, at the stark contrast to the shadow that had loomed over our lives. It reminded me why every sleepless night, every anxious thought, had been worth enduring. The officers were wrapping up, cataloging evidence, and taking statements. I watched the culprits through the lens of the camera feed one last time. Every smirk, every forced compliance, every micro-expression that betrayed their panic under scrutiny. I could see the power dynamic shift, the control they once wielded evaporating into legal procedure. The sense of justice, slow and deliberate, was visceral. In the quiet moments between statements and paperwork, I allowed myself to reflect on the transformation within me. Fear had sharpened into vigilance, protectiveness had hardened into resolve. I was no longer merely a parent reacting in real time. I was a strategist, an observer, a guardian prepared to anticipate danger before it could touch my family. The landlord lingered, watching me with a knowing expression. "You've changed," he said softly. "You can't go back to seeing the world the same way after this." I nodded, understanding the truth in his words. He didn't need to explain. I already felt it. Every noise in the hallway, every shadow in the corner of my eye, every unexpected knock or ring would now trigger instinctive awareness. And yet I welcomed it. That heightened vigilance, born of terror and necessity, was now my armor. A flash of disbelief passed through me as I considered how close we had come to catastrophe. I replayed the moments when hesitation could have spelled disaster. The second the intruder's hands hovered near her door, The split second they could have discovered her alone. My stomach twisted, and I felt the lingering pulse of adrenaline in my veins. The terror wasn't just memory, it was a visceral lesson etched deep. The night's events had forged a new clarity. Gratitude toward the landlord was mixed with an undeniable respect for the law enforcement officers who ensured the predators would harm no one else. But it was more than gratitude. It was a recognition of the thin line that separates safety from catastrophe, and the personal responsibility that comes with seeing that line clearly. I guided my daughter to her room, tucking her in with the same care I had always given but with a sharper, more conscious awareness. "Sleep well," I whispered. "No one can hurt you now." And as I watched her drift into sleep, the enormity of the night settled around me. The fear, the planning, the confrontation, and the eventual justice had left me changed. I understood, finally, that danger isn't always loud or obvious. It hides in ordinary moments, in neighbors who smile too easily, in doors left slightly ajar, in quiet patterns we choose to ignore. I exhaled deeply, letting the last tremor of tension fade. Relief washed over me, genuine and deep, but tempered with a steadfast resolve. I had learned the hardest lesson of all: vigilance is not optional, protectiveness is not passive, and courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the precision with which we act in its presence. The neighbors were caught. My daughter was safe, and I was no longer the person who would ever underestimate the shadows lurking in the corners of what seemed like an ordinary life. I never thought a quiet evening could feel so heavy, and yet so alive. The apartment was finally still. The hum of the city outside our window no longer felt threatening. It was simply life going on. My daughter sat beside me on the couch, her small hand resting in mine. She didn't fully understand the danger that had lurked just steps away, and for now, I didn't intend to explain it. "Not yet. Mom," she whispered, voice soft. "Why were we scared?" I swallowed, glancing at her innocent face, so trusting, so fragile. "Because sometimes people hide bad intentions," I said carefully. "But we were careful, and that's why we're safe now." She nodded slowly, tilting her head. "How did you know what to do?" "I listened to my instincts," I said, my voice firmer now, the echo of the night's adrenaline still tingling through me. "And I didn't ignore the little warnings that told me something was wrong." Her eyes widened slightly, curiosity and awe mingling. "Instincts?" "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand. "The gut feelings that make you notice things others might miss. They saved us." The calm of the apartment was punctuated by a soft knock at the door. I stood, heart skipping a beat for a fraction of a second before relief washed over me. The landlord entered, hands clasped respectfully, a subtle smile on his face. "I wanted to check in one last time," he said. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the shadows and corners, as if making sure the threats had truly vanished. "You handled everything perfectly. Your planning, your courage, it made all the difference." I nodded, feeling the weight of his acknowledgement settle in my chest. "I couldn't have done it without your help," I admitted. "And I'm grateful for everything." He smiled, a brief, warm gesture that carried understanding and respect. "The community around you matters, but sometimes you have to trust yourself first. You saw what others didn't, and you acted." I watched him leave, closing the door quietly behind him, and let out a long, shuddering breath. The silence that followed was different from the oppressive quiet of the past weeks. It felt like a pause for reflection, a space to acknowledge how close we had come to catastrophe, and how far we had grown. Sitting back down with my daughter, I let my mind wander over the months of subtle warnings I had once brushed aside. Each strange glance, every unexplained noise, every minor discrepancy now felt significant in hindsight. I realized how often normalcy hides danger, how easily comfort can mask threats. The lesson was harsh, but invaluable. "Mom," she asked again, voice small and uncertain, "will bad people come again?" I looked at her, and my gaze hardened, not with fear, but with determination. "If they try," I said slowly, "we'll be ready. We've learned to be vigilant, and we've learned that being careful, trusting our instincts, and acting when something feels wrong is how we stay safe." She nodded, seemingly reassured, and leaned against me. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity, the night's events settling like sediment in my mind. Gratitude, fear, relief, and a sharp awareness of how quickly life can shift, all mingled in a potent cocktail that left me reflective yet resolute. I let the silence stretch, allowing my thoughts to form around the broader picture. It wasn't just about vigilance, it was about understanding the fragility of safety and the importance of listening, truly listening, to the signals life offers. Ignoring them had almost cost us everything. Acting decisively had saved my daughter. That contrast left a bittersweet aftertaste, but also hope. As I watched her finally drift into sleep, the ordinary moments, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft glow of the lamp, the distant sound of traffic, took on new significance. Each small, mundane detail was a victory, a reminder that the chaos we had endured hadn't broken our peace, and that life, in all its ordinary rhythm, could still be treasured. I thought about the months ahead and the vigilance that would shape them. Awareness, instinct, and courage would now guide us in ways they hadn't before. And though the trauma lingered in subtle ways, the quick impulse at a sudden noise, the fleeting suspicion of a neighbor's glance, it was tempered by the profound relief of survival, by the reassurance of being prepared. The world would always have shadows, always harbor risks that hide behind friendly faces and polite greetings. But I had learned that fear does not have to paralyze. It can sharpen, teach, and fortify. And in that clarity, I found a sense of empowerment I hadn't known before. I held my daughter close, letting her warmth anchor me to the present. "We'll be okay," I whispered, not just to her, but to myself. "We've survived, and we're stronger for it. And we'll never take safety, or each other, for granted again." Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within these walls. Inside, we breathed, rested, and reflected. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile but enduring calm. And as I watched the shadows lengthen in the corners of the room, I knew that vigilance, love, and decisive action would remain our shield against the unknown.